Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Paul calls on the husband now. When Paul calls on one part of the relationship, he always calls on the other. Wives, husbands. Children, fathers. Love your wives. This is a loaded term. What does it mean to love? Love is volitional, not emotional. Love is choosing. Love is intentional. You don't fall in love. It's not a hole in the ground. If anything, it's a mountain. To love someone is to intentionally have to take step by step up. It means intention. It means focus. Real love requires hard work. Real love requires a focus and attentiveness. As we think more about the fact that it's a mountain and not a hole, as you continue to climb that mountain, the view just gets more and more glorious. It's not easy. It requires perseverance, consistency, and sacrifice. To love your wife is to intentionally seek her good above your own. Christ is our model. Christ sacrificed everything, his life and his death, for his bride, the church. If we were to love our wives, we were to intentionally seek her good above our own. To love our wife is to commit to her well-being, and her happiness. To love our wife is to pursue her, prioritizing her interest. To love our wife is to prioritize her interest. When youthful boys pursue girls, it is prioritizing the boy's interest. Young ladies, hear that. When a youthful boy is pursuing you, it's to prioritize his interest. When a Christian man pursues a woman, it is to prioritize her interest. Men, when we make our vows, when we were married, we said in sickness and in health, and rich and poor. We had no idea what we were saying. I was just saying, get on with it before she changes her mind. But we have that romantic notion. We have no idea what we're saying there. Because love gets difficult. When you're saying those words, when you're making those commitments, you kind of have this pie in the sky, a nice suburban home with a white picket fence and children all dressed normal and having fun and playing. But the reality is, life gets difficult. It becomes a burden and a trial to intentionally focus your love on your wife. So when difficulties come, that's when your love needs to be determined. Difficulties come. That's why your love must be determined. You cannot think you're going to constantly be falling in love. You must constantly be putting your heart, your affection on her. The high calling of a Christian man is to love his wife as Christ loved his church. I want to think about 4 ways we can define love according to Christ's love. A husband protects, a husband provides, a husband cares, and a husband sacrifices. A husband protects, a husband provides, a husband cares, a husband sacrifices. First, a husband protects his wife. To love your wife means to protect your wife. First, kind of the macho one, from violence. This is the one we think of, yeah, that'd be great. Somebody attacks my wife, I can prove my love to her. This is the movie love. You want to protect her from violence. When we think of most, we really don't live in village warfare anymore. You know, the suburb next door isn't going to come and try to attack your wife. But you do need to be prepared to protect your wife from violence. Secondly, you need to protect your wife from herself. Protect your wife from herself, from being overcommitted, taking on too much responsibility. Oftentimes, you need to protect her from not having a proper perspective in the midst of suffering. You need to know when she's struggling, know the clues as to when she's in despair. You need to make sure you are preaching the gospel to her regularly. You need to protect her from losing perspective, especially when it comes to having a proper view of herself. Protect your wife from not realizing how beautiful she is. That means regular compliments. You need to protect your wife from the children. Children oftentimes will be more aggressively sinful towards the mom. It's your job to protect your wife from the children. That means you come alongside and you teach them respect. You teach them to respect women. You teach them to respect their mother. Now, this is very important. Your actions towards your wife have to match your words about her. They're going to learn more about respecting your wife, their mother, by the way you respect her than what you teach them. If your children are disrespectful towards your wife, you need to think and ask yourself, is that because I'm not showing her proper respect? You need to protect your wife from others' expectations, other people putting expectations that aren't helpful on your wife, from others who may want to hurt your wife by saying things that aren't helpful and that are hurtful. Finally, we need to protect our wives from Satan. We need to protect our wives from the evil one. We need to protect our wives spiritually. We need to realize that we do not have the power to protect them, so we need to be praying constantly for them. A husband protects. Secondly, a husband provides. A husband provides. First, we can think of physical needs. A husband needs to provide the physical necessities of the home. Now, that doesn't mean, I don't believe a husband has to be the primary breadwinner. The husband is just the one who is responsible to make sure food is on the table. Kids are clothed. Shelter is provided. If your wife is the primary breadwinner and she loses her job, you need to start learning how to flip burgers somewhere or find a job as quickly as possible. It is your responsibility, no matter what the situation is, to make sure that the physical well-being of the family is provided. This oftentimes leaders having to ask for help. It means you need to be humble. A husband needs to provide stability. This is one of the greatest provisions the home needs, stability. Are you consistent when you come home? Let's put that another way. Are you consistently peaceful and joyful when you come home? Is there a stability in the home that you are providing with godly, prayerful leadership? Third, a husband must care for his wife. And I believe that the key word here that I want to just put into your mind for this is responsibility. You have been given an authority. She's submitting to you. You've been given an authority, and with that authority, you're supposed to exalt her and lift her up and love her. Put her above yourself. That's a beautiful picture of the gospel marriage. She's submitting to you, and by her submitting to you, you're supposed to be lifting her up higher as Christ lifted up the church. You're responsible for her. God's given you an authority over her. See that as a responsibility. It's a stewardship. Her spiritual, emotional, and physical beauty is your responsibility. Her well-being is in your hands. It's a calling that God has given you. So this is a calling you're going to have to give an account. Husbands, when you have to stand before God, you will have to give an account for everything you did in caring or not caring for your wife. We oftentimes think of the passage in Scripture where it talks about Paul getting before God and saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's the words we all want to hear. That's the words we should want to hear first and foremost in our marriage. Husbands, are you being faithful? It's a mission because her spiritual well-being is our responsibility. We must be proactive in doing this because a sinful tendency is to be neglectful, to get busy, to assume things are well. It's so easy to abandon our wife's interest with other interests. That's why it must be intentional. You don't fall in love, you intentionally love. Finally, the last aspect, sacrificial. The last aspect of love. You lay down your life for your wife, as Christ did for the church. He is the model. He is the picture of husband love. Loving her must be the driving force of your leadership. If not, you're a tyrant. Loving her as Christ loved the church must be the way you lead. If you have a hard time sacrificing, you need to think about the gospel. You need to think about how Christ sacrificed himself for the church. You need to make sure your mind is being transformed by the model of marriage. Now I can hear men saying, but you don't understand, she just doesn't submit. It's hard for me to love her. It's hard for me to lead her because she just won't submit. She won't respect me. That's not an excuse. The gospel tells us it's not an excuse. The church wasn't respectful and submissive to Christ, and that's why he loved her. He loved her even when the church was abandoning him. He loved those who rejected him. He loved those who hated him. He loved those who spat and fought against him. There's imagery in the Bible. There's imagery in the Bible that calls the church, that calls God's people a whore. Because we are constantly prostituting ourselves to other gods. And yet God doesn't stop loving us. God loves the unlovely. Your wife not respecting you and not submitting to you, that's not an excuse not to love her. Christ loved you when you were not submissive. Christ loved you when you're not respectful. That's the beauty of the gospel. While we were still sinners, God loved us. While we were still sinners, God chose to come down and die for us as sinners. The model, the bar is set high, men. And you'll never reach it. I know you're not God. But that's still what we are to strive for. When your wife is not submitting, when your wife is not respecting you as you think she should, you love her all the more as Christ has loved us. Husbands, she is submit to you and you are to love her. This means you are the leader. You must get your leading directions. You must get your orders for leadership. You're not the commander-in-chief of the home. Christ is the head of you. You don't determine what's right or wrong. God has determined what's right or wrong. You lead your wife according to God's good word. You lead your wife according to Christ's instructions. You must teach what Christ has taught. You must model what Christ has taught. This means you lead with obedience. You are the one who's supposed to be modeling putting off sin and putting on the garments of the soul. Lead with love means you are leading by listening. You cannot love your wife unless you're listening. This means we need to listen before we speak. It means we need to listen more than we speak. Our wives are to be studied. Our wives are to be known. We need to know what upsets them. We need to know what makes them happy. We need to pursue caring for them and what upsets them and promoting what makes them happy. Finally, we need to be praying for our wives. We cannot accomplish their happiness alone. We cannot affect their souls. We need to trust God to make our efforts effectual.